Okay, I've got a lot of questions posting pictures of my concourse online for how did I make this? Because it's a 1/200 scale airport. There's just not a lot of kits, if any, out there for 1/200 scale. There's a lot for 100, 1/400, and 1/500, but when you get into larger models on 1/200, you almost have to go at it on your own. So first thing you got to do is you got to decide if you're making this thing, what airport you're going to model off of. Is it going to be a generic design or is it going to be something specific? And I ended up going with something specific. I chose San Diego's Lindbergh Field, specifically Terminal 1. Terminal 1 has two concourses, and what you see in front of you is half of one of the concourses, I should say, half of the terminal. There's two, and they're both identical. They're those round terminals that connect back to the main part, which I'll make at a later time. So it took me a while coming up with how I'm going to make this thing. Like I said, because there's no kits, so you got to basically go to model shops or hobby shops and just kind of plug and play and be creative with what you think might work. And I tried a couple different things. What I finally landed on for my version for this circular terminal, I ended up finding this cardboard hat box. It was a hollow hat box. It sat about 4 inches tall. I've cut it down. This is the cut down version, but about 4 inches tall with the cover on it. And it took me a while to even find that. It's a 10 inch diameter is the size I went with. And for the 1/200 scale, that's pretty close to what it should be in real life. I think if I could have gone to maybe 10.5 inches or 11, it would have been perfect. But you got to go with what you can, because you're getting all kinds of random stuff to make these airports. So that was the hardest part, was finding that foundation right there. Once I did that, I started going through and how I was actually going to design this thing from the ground up. So I sketched it out. This was used also to identify the gates. That's what those numbers around the outside are. Then you see the type of aircraft you're going to be housing at those gates. And then you can see how long all the jetways are going to be and what orientation they're going to be in. And then you can see the number on the jetway. I got 8mm and 10mm. That's just the size of the plastic tubing I'm using on these things. You can see from this is my Southwest gate. Southwest Concourse. It's all Southwest Airlines. The next one's going to be almost entirely Alaska Airlines with the one Frontier gate, which is kind of what you see up here. This is actually the Southwest portion of it. Just has my Alaska Airline models there just to see what they'd look like for the next one I make. All right, so once I sketch this thing out, I can start going to work on completing the actual terminal. So I would, what I ended up doing with this is getting it at Home Depot, going and getting some textured spray paint to give it some depth, not just the regular, glossy paint, to give it kind of that concrete look up top, as you can see on the top. And I'll spray that thing with the texture paint. And then next thing I had was the two rings around the outside. And what I found with those were at the same hobby shop. I'm not even sure what these things are supposed to be for in real life, but they're it's kind of just a round circular piece of wood that fastens at the end. That you don't even use these fasteners. And then inside that, there's another piece of wood that goes inside, and that's what I ended up using. And you can spray paint. This one's already been spray painted as well with the same texture paint as you see on that. And that is most of the foundation. The back part of that foundation where it connects to the right, that's just thin wood. That was one of the easiest parts to make, just gluing the walls together and the ceiling just to make it look like that. I, of course, painted that with the paint as well. The ring around the middle, the windows, it took a while to figure out what I was actually going to use with that. What I actually ended up going with was just getting one of these carrying cases for school. This was designed to have like pencils and pens, and it had like it was like a Ziploc bag. I got this at I think Office Max or Office Depot, one of those two. And I just cut it up to the size I needed. I fit it to each section in there, and then I just super glued it to the cardboard box. The trim around the windows, that cross frame, that's just adhesive paper that I got also at Office Depot. That's what this is right here, the sticky project paper. It has adhesive back, So I cut that in strips on a regular paper cutter, real thin strips, and then just one at a time, adhese them to the plastic, and that's how I got those windows. Again, there's more than one way to skin a cat, but this is just how I did it. It took, again, a lot of trial and error coming up with what I thought would look the best. And that basically completes most of the terminal. On top, those I believe are either the ventilation pipes in real life, or they're some sort of coolant pipes. But those are just wooden dowels I've cut and placed together on this. Square wooden dowels on the top that I've cut. I've kind of textured them a little bit just so they don't look like straight up wood dowel. Those lines, hash marks, are just me getting a knife, an X-Acto knife, and just one by one placing those things into the wood. And let's connect back to the back there. And the last thing on the terminal, which is one of the final details I attached, were the gate numbers. What I used for that, another key thing you're going to use is this adhesive-backed foam paper. It's soft, it compresses, and on the back it's got the adhesive as well. And I used that. I printed out the numbers on regular printer paper, glued them to this, and then cut them to size it, and then pasted those things so that it has some depth. You see on there, it's not just flush. It looks like it's actually built into the structure. I thought that came out pretty good. And that was the entire terminal. One of the hardest things to do, the terminal, that takes a lot of time. It was hard, but that was the easy part. The hard part are the concourses. It took a lot of trial and error deciding how I was going to make these things. I started thinking I was just going to use this 8 and 10 millimeter wood, but I think I tried one, and I kind of gave up on it because it just looked so terrible in my opinion. So I stopped that, went back online, searched and searched and searched, and eventually I found on eBay someone who makes this square plastic tubing. So I got a bunch of these things. They're 8 and 10 millimeter. The 8 millimeters fits into the 10 millimeter, as you can see right here. It slides in and out. And that's really the only part of my Jetways that move. All right, the rest of the Jetways is hard fixed. So when you're making my version of the Jetways, they are specifically designed for which location they're going to be at on the gate and what aircraft you're going to be using, because the different aircraft have different heights. So for instance, that Airbus sits a lot higher than the 737. It has to be up higher. You can see for the CRJ, like I said, no, this one's not made for the CRJ. This is the Southwest terminal, so it's all 737 size. But for the Alaskan one, when I make that Jetway, it's going to have to sit a lot lower for the CRJ 700. So there you go. But so you make using the wooden dowels for the connection points, you just cut sections of the wooden dowel off. I mean, they're just circular. You can see from the top. And I just used a combination of super glue and wood glue to attach those things. From where it attaches to the terminal, I took that same wooden dowel, which comes in like this variety pack. I cut a section off at the bottom, and then I cut further that section down to kind of that shape, and that's how it attaches to the terminal. Then you attach the tubing to the attachment point, and then you make the Jetway from there, designed per how you planned it out to go for the layout. Another thing I use to make these Jetways, you can tell that the plastic tubing, it's all flat and square, and all my attachment points are circular. So I have a Dremel tool with a bunch of these little grinders I got also at Lowe's. And you can see they're just about the right size. If you come back over to the dowel I was using. Pretty close. It's a little smaller than that. It's a little closer size to the other wooden dowel I was using. But that's how I was using that Dremel grinder to grind down this, the flat plastic, so that when it actually attaches to the dowel, it actually would fit in there. So that took a lot. And again, when you're grinding that thing down, depending on the height of the aircraft, you grind you know, the different sections of the Jetway. So like when you go from this, let's take this one right here for instance, as it comes out of the terminal, it comes basically straight out to the next pivot point. So those are just two. You can see how I've kind of curved it in there. But as you get to this next section, it goes from a higher section to a lower section. So you actually have to texture the bottom part of the Jetway. You have to grind it in a little more so that it actually sits angling down. I was pretty happy with eventually how these Jetways came out, but I was skeptical all the way to the end. You can tell on there, on the final version, it looks kind of an accordion effect. I used, to make that accordion effect, I got a bunch of this sticker project paper. I think I picked it up at Office Depot. And I cut that into thin strips. It's adhesively backed. So you cut it into really thin strips. I just wrapped it around strip after strip. You can see the strips on there. They kind of, so it's not really, you know, true accordion. When you look at it close up, you can kind of tell what it is. But when you look at it far away, just at a glance, I think it came out pretty good. All the wood is glued to there, either with super glue or wood glue, depending on what you want to use. And that's the main structure of the Jetway. Then when you get to the end there, I use that same foam pad to make the awning. And I'll show you, here's one that I haven't attached yet. So I just layered it up. There's about 3 different layers of foam padding you can see in there. The first layer I only cut half size, so the top half, and then the rest of them are just square out. What that does is it angles the top farther out than the bottom, so it actually sits against the aircraft. And that foam pad, it has adhesive back, so I don't have to use any glue. We'll see how long that actually stays on there before it starts coming out. That's the end of it. And then the final part of these Jetways is this little numbering system. And again, that was foam pad as well. That was like the very last thing I did, was add those numbers to the top. What I did was I printed out on regular printer paper, just 1 through 10. On you know, I highlighted the back black, made the lettering white, and then I took that foam paper, glued the paper to the foam, and then glued the foam to the top. It's pretty flimsy. You can just knock it over with your finger if you really want to, but just for display purposes, it's been sitting up there for at least 3 days now, so it's good enough. I did just order half a dozen Jetways from this guy in Russia. They're a little pricey. I haven't got them yet. I'll include a picture when I get them, what they look like. But they are fully movable Jetways. I can only get 6 because they're $60 a piece. Making these Jetways runs about $4 or $5 a piece the way I make them, but when you buy them online, it's $60. So I just got them to see what they look like. I'll post them and compare the two. Again, it's kind of bummed. I'm kind of bummed out with mine that you can't move them at all. But they look good just sitting there. And the last thing we'll talk about, I guess, on this airport, the ground foil. There's a couple free ones out there that don't charge you to download the images. And if you just Google free 1/200 scale or 1/200 ground foil, you should be able to find the same ones I did. This is the beta version for me. These ground foils I printed out on regular printer paper and just attached with tape on the bottom, so it looks pretty rough. That's probably the roughest part of this whole thing. But I do actually have some really nice ground foil paper that I bought straight up on eBay. I just have to go down and get a better printer to print out the transparent stickers. I'm going to stick those right on there. It's going to look a lot better. But just to see the layout, to see if I can actually make it work, I came up with this design. And as I make all this stuff, the second terminal, I'll post a couple other videos as I go through it. Kind of maybe, or even just pictures, let you guys see what I'm doing, if you're interested in it all. So that you can see how it goes from the rough copy to the final version. All right.